hello everyone, and thank you for joining this important meeting today. I'm Brianna Wesley, the intern candidate at Prairie A&M University, and I'm also the assistant principal here at STEP. Today our focus is addressing the challenges that we've identified with our third grade students, like we did in our meeting a few weeks ago. When we're particularly talking about our EV learners in third grade that are mastering multiplication. We know that we said that multiplication is something that is spread out, so they learn it, in third grade, and it keeps going. It keeps building upon the different levels of math as the grade levels go on. So that's something that we feel like they need to, we really need to focus on so that they can be able to meet those TEKs and understand them and master them for the years to come. So in this meeting, we're going to have the opportunity to collaborate and to develop the proposal that supports their success both academically and linguistically. Before we dive into our discussion, let's take a moment again to introduce ourselves. Please share your name, your role, and why you think addressing the needs of our EB students in math is critical for their success.
All right, hi everyone. I'm Janice Schaefer. I'm the principal here at Willcrest. This will be completing my 5th year, so I've completed 4th year, so this will be my 5th here at STEP. And I've seen how the language development directly affects our EB students, their ability to participate in complex topics in math, and addressing these challenges is very crucial, not just for their academic success, but for building confidence in their learning capabilities and their overall experience with school and learning. We want it to be positive and to enjoy coming to school. And a lot of times math can be that subject that is more challenging. And so I know that was my experience growing up, was I always struggled more in my math classes, but I loved my reading classes, so that's where the balance kind of happened for me and made me love school. But anyways, looking forward to jumping into our data today and continuing this conversation on our 3rd grade students.
Great. Hello everybody, I'm Ms. Ricio. I've been working at STEP Charter for 6 years now. This is my 7th year. And also, like Ms. Schaefer said, from my experience, it's clear that our emergent bilingual students, or for that population, math is more than just numbers. It's about understanding the language of the problems. So I'm also looking forward to discussing different strategies that integrate language and math instruction.
Hi, I'm Cheyenne. I've been teaching 3rd grade for 4 years here at STEP. I've seen how difficult it is for my EB students to grasp math concepts while they're simultaneously learning English. Finding ways to support their language development in math is super essential, I believe.
Hi everybody, my name is Martha. This is my 2nd year teaching 3rd grade at STEP. One of the biggest challenges I've seen is that many of our EB students understand how to solve math problems, but struggle when it comes to interpreting the language in the word problems. I'm excited to explore solutions to help bridge that gap.
And again, we said that multiplication was that skill that we're working on, but we said that academic language is one of those things that we feel like ties in to multiplication as well, especially when it comes to word problems. It's hard for students to understand a word problem in English if they're still learning that language. So we're specifically trying to figure out how we can help them not only master multiplication, but be able to also integrate academic language into those daily routines and classes. And we said not just in math, but in all subject areas across the board. All right, so thank you all for your introductions. Before we move forward, I would like to quickly set some norms for our discussion today. So let's stay focused on solutions that directly address the needs of our EB students. Let's keep our comments constructive and ensure that everyone's voice is heard. Does everyone agree?
Yeah.
Yes. So we have our table report right here. We have all of our data sitting out on the table. And so let's talk about some of our key campus data and directly talking about our 3rd grade students. Again, this is STEP Charter. We're specifically talking about the Willcrest campus. We have 3 campuses. They're all K through 8th grade campuses. And we have a total, specifically here at Willcrest, in all grade levels, about 305 students. In our 3rd grade classes, we have 2 classes that have 20 students in each. 54% of them are EB students. And then we have these students not only face the challenge of learning new math concepts, but again, we're also talking about their proficiency in learning that academic language, in English specifically. And so when we look at our academic performance data, only 32% of our EB students in math are either meeting or exceeding the grade level expectations in multiplication. 32% is not that high considering the fact of how many kids we have, overall. And so we're trying to figure out ways, again, that we can get that percentage higher and meeting the needs of our EB students. So we see that this indicates a significant gap, and that's something that we're talking about. That's why we're here today, to address what we can do and come up with a plan of how we can support these kids in mastering those multiplication skills. So today's goal, we're going to come up with that instructional activity that's going to help these kids improve both their math skills and those academic language proficiencies. In terms of our academic performance, we noticed that according to our data with all of our diagnostic tests and things that we use in class, our technology programs, only 25% of our third grade ED students are meeting or exceeding the grade level expectations in math. Again, that's low. So we need to figure out how we can, move these kids forward. And so given this data, Jana, what are your thoughts on why it's important to focus on math and language supports for our ED students?
Well, it's clear that without addressing the language barrier, our ED students will continue to struggle. The language of math can be very complex, and if students don't understand the terminology and the context of the word problems, then they're going to have trouble figuring out which operation to use to solve the problem. Math has very specific vocabulary words that aren't seen in other subjects. Like, we're not going to see parallelogram used in a fictional story, unless maybe it's talking about something that's being learned in a math class in a story. But those very specific words also a lot of times are more complex, and they can't be simplified. There's not a more simple form of the word parallelogram.
Right.
It's just that this is what a parallelogram means.
Right.
Because the content, language, and supports that the kids get as an accommodation provides more simplified versions of the word, but only if there is one that exists. And so there wouldn't be something offered to them to help them understand a complex word like parallelogram. So we have to make sure that we're teaching that academic language explicitly, whether it's through like word walls, or I was always a huge fan when I was teaching of the foldables, where it's like the 5 vocabulary words, and on the inside there's the picture, the definition, and a sentence, and then kids just save those, and then they just like can create a bank of words to review. And then when STAR starts to come around is unfortunately typically when parents start to say, well, what can we do?
Right.
And that's a resource that was already made. If you've started those foldables and they've collected them and built up a library, that's something that the parents can do. They can sit there and flip those foldables with the kids. So, and that's just one example. I know that our staff has lots of other great like things that they've done in the classroom to teach vocabulary.
I specifically like that strategy though, because I think a lot of times we look at vocabulary, some people look at vocabulary as just looking at the word and writing the definition. But for kids, that's not necessarily, we can go look at a dictionary just as if our kids look at the dictionary, but how do we know that what they're reading in that sentence makes sense in their understanding?
Right.
So I think using the foldable and being able to, if they're drawing a picture, creating an example, taking that vocabulary word and seeing it different ways, it's helping them be able to understand what it actually means. And so I know for me, when I was teaching math in the classroom, I like to start a unit, whether it was in math, whether it was in science, I started a unit off teaching vocabulary. Because if you don't, once you get to words, operations for an example, yes, they might know the symbol of it, but what does that mean? Or what words, if I see this word in a word problem, how do I know I'm supposed to be multiplying or adding or subtracting? And so I think if we teach the academic language first with that vocabulary at the beginning of each unit, it's easier for kids to kind of visualize what it means when we're getting deep into the unit. And And so, Ms. Riccio, in your experience, because I know you are a former math teacher too and also our district math coach, what strategies have you found effective for supporting our EB students in both language and content simultaneously?
Yeah, I've found that using visuals, like pictures, diagrams, alongside math problems can really help. Some of the strategies that I've seen being used in the classroom this year are, for example, like cubes, or RDW, which stands for read, draw, write. And so that really forces kids to internalize what they're reading. So they have to read the story and then draw a picture. And that's something that kids can use up until 8th grade. And it'll look different, obviously, a picture that a 3rd grader draws from something that maybe an Algebra 1 student is going to draw. But essentially they can draw a strip diagram, tape diagram. For your lower grades it could be, a picture of circles or, whatever the case be. But drawing to help them really understand the action that's taking place in the problem. And then writing like a number sentence attached that represents the pictorial model that they drew. So, that's something that I've really been encouraging the teachers to use. Like I said, a lot of them are already using cubes. But, going back to the visuals, that's huge too. I recently printed out some like math posters for one of our teachers, so that she could display them in her classroom, especially for those emergent bilingual students, because they need to make those connections, because it's probably the first time they're hearing those words, right? Like Jana mentioned, parallelogram, obtuse, all of the math vocabulary. They haven't heard that in their normal day-to-day life,
right?
Especially because they're barely learning English. So having word walls is essential. It's a must. And also visuals like pictures, and so you can always refer back to those as you're working through that unit. You refer back to those visuals or those posters that you display in your room, and it does help the kids because when they're working, they'll reference back to that paper chart or that poster that you hung up. And visuals really give students a way to connect the language they're learning with the math concept. Also incorporating their home language. I know we're not a bilingual school, but even just how we mentioned with Brianna, how you said you always started off the unit going over the vocabulary. Like, we can print out bilingual word walls for our classrooms so that students can make the connection between the word in English and in their native language, which in our case most of those speak Spanish. And so, as you're introducing these words throughout the unit, you're displaying them on your board, on your walls, and the kids can, it helps make those connections. So, like I mentioned, bilingual word walls are great, and those can really help students bridge the gap between their language skills and, math content.
And that's a great point, because I also like the idea of having multiple ways to display, just because even someone that's not an EB student, everyone learns differently, right? We have different types of learners, so we should be giving our EB students the same opportunities to be able to learn the academic language, whether it's visually or them hearing it, them seeing it, so it's just the same way that a student will learn that's not EB, and we're providing them opportunities to see it multiple ways or hear it multiple ways. I think we should be doing that same thing with our EB students. Cheyenne, how do you approach differentiation in your classroom when it comes to EB students who are at different levels in both language and in math?
Differentiation is key, especially in a class with a mixed language abilities. I try to group students based on their math and language proficiency, so that I can target support in that area. In small groups, we work on breaking down word problems and focusing on the vocabulary they need to understand the math concept. I think to piggyback on what Ms. Riccio said, it is beneficial to show them what the word is in their language and then what it is in our language. And so like putting those bilingual word walls up just to help them see like, okay, when I see that word, that's what that means. And making those connections in that way. It definitely helps working in small groups benefits them a lot as well, just because you're really able to see like, okay, this is where you're not understanding. And typically you'll see if one kid isn't understanding something, so is the next. So working in those small groups helps as well.
And I think that sounds very effective, especially working in small groups, because like you said, when you're working in a whole group, it's hard to see, pick out the kids that maybe you're not understanding. Kids are kids. So just like an adult, maybe we're in a staff meeting and we might say, a lot of times we don't want to raise our hand in front of everyone and say, I don't get this, I don't understand this. We wait until everyone leaves and we go ask questions. Same thing with kids, but when we're working one-on-one, or in small groups, it's easier to see. You can you can just tell, their demeanor. And so that's one thing I love here about STEP is that we don't do a lot of whole group instruction. We're doing small groups, so we're able to meet the needs of all students and fill in those gaps where needed.
And I think kids feel more comfortable and safe in small groups. More likely to ask questions, like Miss Wesley was just saying, like even as adults, we'll wait till everyone else leaves before we ask our question because we don't have the confidence to ask. So what makes us think our students are going to, and when they're with other people that they, because kids are very aware, they're aware of their surroundings, and as they get older, especially in around 3rd grade, like they can know that like this is the smart kid. And maybe they don't feel so comfortable saying something in front of the smart kid because the smart kid's probably already gonna know. And so when they're in a group of the same ability kids, they'll feel okay asking because they're probably thinking, I bet nobody knows this at this table because that's why we're all here. And that's what we hope for anyways. And then even though there is research that shows that kids do learn from each other and it's sometimes good to have the low kids and the high kids paired together, but it just has to be the right personality of a high kid. Because we all had the high kids before who really aren't helpers. They really don't.
Little know-it-all.
They're know-it-alls and they really don't care to try to help a friend out. But we've all had high kids before. Also, the contrast to that, who love to help. They will sit there and be little mini teachers and sometimes are a great resource. So just every classroom personalities are different.
And I think kids learn off each other too. It's been times where, maybe you have a student in a classroom that is an EB student, and maybe you sit them next to a student that is also an EB student, and then maybe next to them is someone that's not an EB student, but they're all kind of helping each other and feeding off of each other. And so I feel like that's important too. It also kind of makes them feel comfortable too, because sometimes it's hard. Imagine being an adult and we don't know a language and everybody around you speaking that language, you feel kind of left out in a way. You feel uncomfortable. And so same thing with kids. And so I feel like whenever we're putting the kids together and helping them, learn off each other, that makes them feel like, more comfortable being there and learning English and, just succeeding in school in general. So
And research shows that emergent bilingual students need the opportunity to interact with and need to have those opportunities in class to speak and share ideas with others. So you could do think pair shares. Like you guys said, you have your mixed ability groups, or you have your high student that is going to help the student whose native language is Spanish or something other than English, and they can help translate for them, or it gives the other student, the EB student, the confidence, or it has to be something that they feel comfortable with sharing, but they need those opportunities to talk about the content that they're learning in class. And so, I think that the way our school is set up with small groups really lends itself to giving your kids the opportunity to engage in language and have those conversations.
definitely agree. So let's see, Mirtha, last meeting you mentioned that engagement can be an issue with some of your EB students. How do you keep them motivated, particularly when they struggle with language of math?
So I try to incorporate hands-on activities like math games that don't rely too heavily on language. For example, we're using manipulatives like counters and arrays so students understand the math visually, which keeps them engaged even if they're struggling with the language.
I definitely.
I feel like you commonly see things like manipulatives and the like tens block counters and things like that in the lower grades. And there's nothing wrong with students, and Ms. Wesley did already touch on this, but they are just best practices teaching strategies that not only help our EB students, but really help all of our kids.
Yeah.
All kids benefit from hands-on, engaging activities, and direct vocabulary instruction, small group instruction, and so I feel like it shouldn't just be a focus just for EB kids, but just something that we're doing in all of our classrooms for all of our kids.
And I think we do a good job here at STEP providing teachers with those manipulatives in each class, and even if they ask for more than what they're providing, we're very open to getting them for them. I feel like the teachers here really take the benefit of using manipulatives with all students, and it like you said, it doesn't just benefit ED students, but all students in general. So, I mean, kids, especially when it comes to adding and subtracting, I still see kids. It's funny because you'll see kids in an older grade level still counting on their fingers. And so, but when they have those manipulatives, they don't have to, they can just kind of, and that's okay that, they're not in kindergarten, but they're using manipulatives, So, although it is more popular in the lower grade levels, we make sure that all teachers have access to manipulatives across the board in all grade levels. So, all right, so now let's dive into some specific gaps that we've identified based on our data and our classroom observations. We have some key gaps that are impacting our EB students, specifically in math. So the first thing we came up with was the foundational math skills. We know that many of our students, especially EB students, they're struggling with those basic math operations. And it's making them harder to grasp multiplication. Again, multiplication, subtraction, division, they all bounce off of each other. And so I think it's hard when it comes to multiplication, where we can't add. If adding is hard, then multiplication is hard. Because you're trying to figure out how many groups of something. If you have 5, if you're saying 5 times 4, well, I have 5 4 times. Well, if you can't add 5 4 times, then you can't multiply 5 times 4. So that's what's making it hard. So I think having those foundational math skills, addition and subtraction first, specifically, then moving on to multiplication and division, since they bounce off of each other. Academic language. Again, our EB students, they often struggle to understand the academic language in math, particularly in word problems, again, because whenever you see the symbols like multiplication, division, it's easy for them to see, and they might know what it looks like, but actually knowing the word and what it means, and also being able to pick out what operation I'm supposed to be doing. Like if it's saying how many are left over, I know I'm supposed to be subtracting, or how many groups can I make of something, I know I'm supposed to be dividing. And so just being able to really pick out that academic language and that vocabulary in each unit so that they can understand those word problems. Our engagement. Like Mirtha said, we have a lot of students that are disengaged whenever it comes to traditional teaching methods, like worksheets or rote memorization, and that's not aligning with their learning needs. So like Mirtha said, she has different things like hands-on activities, using manipulatives, visuals, finding other ways for them to be engaged and be able to pick up those foundational math skills and academic language. And then, as Cheyenne mentioned or touched on, differentiation. Again, I think we do a great job here at STEP differentiating our instruction, but taking it even further and getting better at tailoring our instructions to meet those diverse needs of our EB students, who are at the different levels in both the language and in math. Again, same thing with students that are not EB. We have to do the same thing with students that are EB. Everybody's at different levels, so we have to make sure that we're tailoring the needs to those specific students. Jana, how do you see these gaps affecting the overall academic performance of our third graders?
These gaps that you mentioned are absolutely affecting their overall performance. If students don't have a strong foundation in the basic operations, they'll struggle as they move to more complex math, since it builds on each other every concept and then year after year. So if those foundational skills aren't mastered, the kids are just starting off from behind, and that gap will just continue to grow. And when the language becomes a barrier, they can't fully engage with the content, and then it becomes a compounding problem that unfortunately sometimes kids get so far behind that they maybe sometimes get to a point where it almost seems impossible to get caught up. And so that's why targeted interventions are crucial, like being identified with those two, the foundational operations of math and then the academic language have to be identified and targeted first. Otherwise, the gap gets so wide that a kid can feel like their confidence can be crushed, their self-esteem. As they get older and they are increasingly becoming more aware of the other kids, they start to realize how much lower behind they are than the other kids. And then it really just has a snowball effect on their overall like feeling about school. And I think like unfortunately for so many kids, it doesn't get targeted and focused on when it should in the early grades. Not for anybody's like intention, and probably just because in like other schools there's just so many kids that kids just fall through the gaps. But when I was at a high school, I would see those kids and I would have them in, or I wouldn't have them in Algebra 1, but they would be in Algebra 1, and I was an assistant principal with kids in Algebra 1, 9th graders who just kept failing it and we're not getting it. Now we're facing dropouts. Now we're facing, they feel like they're never gonna pass, so they might as well just drop out. And that was devastating for me because I wished so bad that I could rewind time for them and go back to 3rd grade and really help, figure out how to provide interventions and get them caught up then. Because I think that's probably, if I looked back at those individual kids, that's probably where the gap started growing and then it just got so big. And so the nice thing about being here at STEP is that we're small, so our kids don't slip through the cracks. We know where everybody's at. We get to know them. We know when we start targeting their instruction in the small groups. And my hope is that we are preventing kids that come through our system from ending up being those Algebra 1 dropout kids.
Another thing that, to piggyback off of that, I think another thing we do a good job at here at STEP is our diverse culture here when it comes to staff. A lot of our teachers, assistants, and teachers were also EB students, and so it's easy for them to understand where those students are coming from because they might have been in a similar situation. So I feel like when we look at it on that side, they're able to actually understand and know how to meet the needs of those kids because they had that experience themselves. And so that's another piece of when it comes to engagement and like being able to understand that like the academic language might be hard, but I know because I was in that situation. So even giving kids like, your personal story, sometimes that also makes them feel engaged and motivated because, like maybe Miss Mirtha or Miss Shine, like they had that same experience, but you'll get there, and so that's one thing I really like about STEP, our diverse culture of our staff. Ms. Riccio, in your experience, how do you think we can address the academic language in math, and what strategies worked for you when you were in the classroom?
Well, I think we need to focus more on teaching academic vocabulary directly, creating word walls with both visual representations and translations in their home language can really help EB students connect with the content, like we mentioned earlier. We can also pre-teach key vocabulary before diving into word problems to ensure that students understand the language before attempting the math.
That's a great strategy. Cheyenne, how do you use small groups to address both the language and the math gaps in your classroom?
I use small groups to provide more personalized instruction. Like I said before, it's easier to see where a student is and where they're struggling and really hone in on that one struggle or that particular area where they're struggling. I often spend extra time breaking down word problems into simpler parts and using more visuals and even manipulatives as well. This allows me to target both their language needs and their understanding of math concepts.
All right, and lastly, taking it back to engagement, as you mentioned, Martha, how do you think that when you incorporate more hands-on activities, or how do you think if you incorporate more hands-on activities, how could that improve students' engagement and their understanding in that language?
Well, I think hands-on activities are essential. When students can manipulate objects and visualize what they're learning, they're more likely to stay engaged. For example, using counters or creating arrays so students see the multiplication process without needing to rely too heavily on what is being said.
And like you said, it's, creating those hands-on activities, I think they are essential too, and having manipulatives, because we don't want students to get to the point where they're disengaged. So if we're giving them all those tools and those things that can help them, they'll be set up for success versus, sitting there, because it gets frustrating when you're not understanding something. Even as an adult, you can try and try and try, and when you're not getting it, it definitely gets frustrating. So same thing for kids when we're talking about that academic language and those multiplication facts. All right, now that we have identified the key gaps, let's brainstorm some solutions. Jana, would you like to start by sharing your thoughts on how we can improve both math instruction and language development for our EB students?
Sure. I think that we need to start by integrating more visuals and manipulatives in our math lessons. Visuals can help ED students understand the abstract concepts without relying solely on the language. We should consider creating math-specific word walls with visuals and bilingual explanations, which can serve as a reference for students during the lessons. Similar to that, I always like to see bilingual labels in classrooms, where maybe like there might be a poster, for example, or an area where the math tools are the calculators, the protractors, and I know that a lot of teachers are very organized, labeling type of people, and so I love to see the bilingual label as well, so the English term protractor and then the Spanish translation underneath. And I know we are focusing on Spanish because that is our main second other language, but there are other languages which that we have in our schools here and stuff, but Spanish is the main one. So the bilingual and the translating of labeling things and word walls doesn't help with all the kids, but if Spanish is not that other language. But everything else we've talked about is, like the manipulatives, there's no language associated with that. The just hands-on activities, when kids are physically involved in something, it just helps them, and when there's movement or an activity involved, it just really helps them remember. Because a lot of times we remember like what we do versus what was said. We might have like a vague memory of like what was said, but if it was something that like took like our bodies to physically do something, we're always more likely to remember it. And I realize that can't be done in every lesson every single day. There has to be balance between direct and explicit instruction in the small groups, your mini lessons, the meat of the lesson, but anytime an activity, a hands-on activity can be incorporated, that would be ideal.
And like you said, Spanish is, mostly that's that second language that we're talking about here for our ED students. But the ones that we do have, the other few that we do have, our even seeing teachers take it a step further, and if it's a language that's not Spanish, they might, even our math coach, being able to create different resources just for those kids as well. Even though maybe it's only a few of them, but also getting what they need, because like we said, although here currently majority of them are Spanish as their native language, we do and will in the future have others that come in with other languages. So being able to help with that, as well as our diverse staff again that we have that are able to meet those needs of those students as well. So, Ms. Ricio, do you think that incorporating more bilingual resources into our math instruction, or what do you think about us incorporating more bilingual?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Bilingual resources can help students make connections between their home language and English, especially when it comes to academic vocabulary. It's also important to use real-world examples in our math problems that reflect their cultural experiences, which can make the content more relatable. So if we make the content more relatable, the higher the chances are for them to grasp it or to stick. So, teachers can include word problems that have to do about when the kid goes to maybe the grocery store, or things that they would encounter in their everyday life. That's a big one. That's part of our standards for our curriculum, is making real world connections. So you know, even something as small as like incorporating the kids' names into our word problems, that even makes it, makes them have a connection to it, or brings it to life. And so that, you know, that can help make the content more relatable to the students.
I agree. I also think we need to use technology more effectively. There's so many educational apps. There's iReady, there's Happy Numbers, there's iExcel, there's the new ones that's Prodigy and Legends of Learning, and those are all kids play video games, whether it's just an app on a phone or they have a console or whatever, they are all playing. So why not mix the two with learning and the games to kind of meet them in the middle and where they are. And it helps them focus on math skills and language development, and they offer interactive games, like I said, to help the students find it more engaging. And this could be a great way to provide additional practice outside of the classroom.
Technology is a great idea. I found that many students really enjoy learning through games, and they're more likely to stay engaged. We could also incorporate peer tutoring where more advanced students help their peers with both math and language. This creates a collaborative learning environment.
And I love how many tech programs we have here at STEP. We have a lot to choose from, and a lot of them are catered to meeting the kids where they are. So for example, iReady, they're taking a diagnostic test at the beginning of the year, and it's sending them those lessons based off of what they need to work on. So it's really being able to close those gaps that we're not closing specifically, you know, like learning one-on-one. And so I like that a lot of our tech programs do that, on top of teachers being able to assign lessons that they want to specific kids or to the whole class if they're learning a specific unit. And so all of our technology programs do that. We make sure that kids have a allotted amount of tech time a day, obviously not too much, but a good balance between hands-on instruction, small group teaching, and being at the technology table. Because although people can say, you know, this new generation and they're technology kids, well, that's how our world is right now. And so us being able to create learning and have learning on the on technology is what I feel like we do a great job with that. And so our K through 2 students have iPads, third grade have Chromebooks, and it's also, I think, preparing them for the real world, taking them a step further, because I remember when I was in school, I didn't have technology at this age that the kids did. So whenever I got to high school and things like that, I didn't know what Word is, you know, I didn't know what Excel was, I didn't know how to use those things, but I think the teachers here in the older grade levels do a good job at like introducing the kids to those things, as long alongside with the apps that we use in all academic areas. So.
And building their digital literacy is important now that the STAR test is online. They all have to be comfortable with that device and all the different features and things to use with it. And another thing I love about the technology work is two kids can be working on something totally different, sitting right next to each other. And that didn't take any extra effort on the teachers, that the teacher's able to take that effort that maybe she would have spent on developing 2 separate lessons for us to work on something else, because the programs do that based on the diagnostic. So, and that also helps kind of with the privacy of that student. Maybe I'm sitting here working on very basic addition and subtraction next to my high friend who's working on like multiplication and division. We don't know what each other is working on, and so it just like protects my integrity in that I can focus on what I'm doing and I don't know what anybody else is doing.
Right.
And helps like just keep their confidence where it should be. So.
Because for all they know, they could be working on the same thing.
Exactly.
You know?
That's what I would think.
So,
If I were them, I'd assume we're all doing the same thing.
Right.
But they don't.
They don't know.
different.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of the programs we use here at STEP have resources for our emerging foreign language students. So, for example, like iReady. Let's say you want your EB students to preview a lesson in Spanish or in their native language. So iReady has Spanish lessons, so you can assign them both, right? You can assign them the Spanish one, and you can assign them the English one, so they can preview it in their native language and then transfer that into, in English. iExcel also has skill in IXL, those students can now have the option to hear that or see that problem in Spanish. Or they can also have the option, for any of our EB students, not just the ones that speak Spanish, but it gives them the option to hear the problem in English. So, you know, it has certain tools that can help our EB students. So, you know, teachers just have to take advantage of those resources on those technology programs.
Alright, so to wrap up our discussion, let's put together some strategies that we discussed today into our concrete proposal. So we talked about using visual aids and manipulatives, and we're going to integrate more visual tools like counters, arrays, as well as visual word walls that include bilingual explanations. So like Ms. Schaefer said, if we have a word, having it in English and Spanish, and having pictures. I think kinder teachers do a really good job at doing this, but maybe if we can, you know, have the other teachers do it as well, because typically kinder teachers, first grade to have everything in their classroom labeled, because those kids are just learning those things, really, a lot of those things, what they are. But having that spread out throughout, maybe not 8th grade, but you know, like maybe K through 3rd, for example. But just having more things labeled, and having those visual word walls that include those bilingual explanations. Bilingual resources. We're going to create some resources that connect math vocabulary in both English and the students' home languages. So again, majority of our EVs native language is Spanish, but we do have some that come from other that have other languages that they speak. And so again, creating those resources for that, and also using real world examples to make the content more relatable. Small group instruction. Again, we already provide small group instruction with our small group teaching here at STEP. But being able to provide more personalized support, focusing on both language and math skills, and also that's something that our teachers assistants can help as well when they're pulling out small groups of kids, and being able to meet the needs of those EB kids. Our technology integration, we're going to incorporate educational apps. We already have a lot, but continuously, like Ms. Ricio said, using the resources that are on there for our EB students. We do a good job at providing PD, professional development, all times throughout the year to be able to really dive into all those resources and capabilities of all of our technology apps, but kind of just staying to date and making sure that teachers know and realize that they can use those resources and they're there for them. And so we're going to offer engaging and interactive those learning experiences with technology. And then peer tutoring and hands-on activities, as Mirtha mentioned. We're going to introduce peer tutoring again with our TAs and with our kids, like you said, kids learning from each other. And continue using those hands-on activities to boost engagement and reinforce that understanding of that academic language. Does everyone agree with this?
Yes.
Alright, great. So I will write up this plan and share it with you guys for review. We'll reconvene in a few weeks, and we're going to assess these strategies and work to make sure they're working. You know, need to make sure they're working, and if not, we can make those necessary adjustments if needed. I am confident that they're going to work, and by us working together, I think that we will close the gap of our EB students and help them achieve success in both math and language. And I know that all these things that we see, it's not something that we're not already doing. I just think we have to take it a step further. You walk in our classrooms, you see visuals, you see manipulatives, you see word walls. We already do small group instruction. We have a lot of technology programs. So it's really just taking what we do already and taking it a step further. And I think we've seen even the years to come, the previous years that STEP, we've seen over the years that these things that we keep adding just makes it better and better. So we're seeing that success in all those technology apps that we're using, and all the visual aids that we're using, and being able to create those real world examples for our EB students and our non-EB students. Alright, so again, I'll write this plan up and review it with you guys, and then we will
strong plan. I'm excited to see the impact that these strategies will have on our students. I know that a lot of these things are things we do, but I think we'll be doing so with more focus and fidelity, and that's what I'm excited to see is the impact that that'll have on our kids.
I agree. I think focusing on both language and math in an integrated way will really help our students overcome these challenges.
I'm looking forward to implementing these strategies in my small groups, and I think they'll make a real difference.
The same here, I'm especially excited about using more bilingual resources and hands-on activities.
Thank you all for your time and input today. I'm excited about these changes that we're making, and I look forward to seeing the positive results in our students. We'll meet again in a few weeks to review our progress. Thank you again, everyone.